Hello and welcome to Talk This.
It's dangerous to podcast alone.
I'm your help, which direction do I go? Host Madelyn.
I'm certain I'm going in the right direction, host Emma.
And thank you for tuning in to this week's show. It's my side quest, and I decided this week, inspired by just my general life experience and also some recent game playing experience, that we're going to be talking about navigation in games.
I'll take a quick second to say sorry that I sound kind of different. My mic has given up the ghost on me, so I'm using my backup. And I don't like the way it sounds as much, so.
Emma's navigating some new technology.
Maybe it's just me. I'm just so used to the way it sounds, but I don't like the way it sounds. But it's fine. I'm sure it's fine.
Can you repitch your voice so that it comes out the same? Work on that throughout the show.
Okay, I'll work on it, yeah.
Anyway, I picked this both because, at any given time, wandering around New York City or other places, I have a propensity to get lost. That's not true. In New York, less than other places because, it is pretty grid-like most of the time.
Mm-hmm.
But recently, in my quest to finish a game in every calendar month of 2025, which probably by the time you're listening to this, I have finished Firewatch, but I did give myself an extension through the end of the weekend for this one.
Fair.
It's still basically January. But I've been playing Firewatch, which I hadn't played before. I needed a short game. I came to the conclusion that I was not going to finish Final Fantasy in the month of January. And I was like, what's a short game that I can play on ye old Nintendo Switch? So I got Firewatch, which I'm sure I will talk about in more detail in the 6-week recap in 4 weeks.
Exciting.
But I am currently almost finished with. And I've really had to come to conclusion in this game that is just a hiking, walking simulator, right? Map reading simulator,
Mm-hmm.
that I am really bad at navigating in this game. I like I said, I'm not a great navigator in real life. I can follow directions. I'm fine as like a driving navigator for the most part, but I just don't have a good natural sense for my surroundings necessarily. I was thinking about this a lot when I was in Barcelona for the last time a few months ago.
Yeah.
For the last time of that era anyway, a few months ago, where it was just like, oh, because I am never looking at a map, I am just following Click Like Boyfriend around. I have not formed any sort of representation of where I'm going for the most part. But yeah, I just don't have a great natural sense of surroundings, but I find that the lack of physicality maybe in video games and particularly in first person video games makes that 10 billion times worse for me.
Yeah. I was thinking about this too. I think, first person games kind of make me motion sick. Period. But yeah, I do not have a good navigation sense in games. I was thinking about this a little bit, and I think it's just because it's hard to orient yourself to a landmark in games.
Yeah.
If I was orienting myself to a landmark in real life, I would just, sort of turn my neck to look at it as
Right.
I adjusted my body to the direction I wanted to go.
Yes.
But
It's to my right.
In first-person games especially, well, in third-person games, you have to swing the camera all the way around.
Yeah.
To look at it.
But that's okay. That in some ways sort of replicates the head turn.
It doesn't for me. That's what I'm saying.
Okay.
Maybe it
for
is
Emma,
for you.
It doesn't.
For me, it
Never
does not. But in first-person games, you have to turn your whole body essentially to look at things and then try to reorient yourself to the correct direction. And I find that very hard in first-person games.
In any given first-person game, you must imagine your character as wearing a neck brace.
Yeah, basically.
And I've found this really annoyingly difficult in Firewatch, and I think maybe it's the amount that I'm having to use the map is only making it worse. Because we'll
it's
all
all
talk
about
this.
that. Yeah.
I'm sure as we talk about mini maps more this episode, but the fact that I have had to be so reliant on the map means that reliance only doubles down on itself because I'm used to the map. But I have a really hard time with orienting myself toward which direction am I facing and which direction have I been walking towards and which way was backwards and which way was forwards in a way that I just know and I can like feel some people who know me laughing at this.
Mm.
If they heard me say it, they'd be like, okay, Madeline, sure. But I just know I would not be this bad about it if it was me walking around in the park.
Sure. Do you
Um,
have like a little like when you look at the map in Firewatch, is it totally static or do you have like a representation of yourself
no,
on
you
it?
have a dot, and in fact, sometimes I struggle with that because I feel
And
like I look at the dot and it tells me I'm facing a certain way, and I move accordingly, and I seem to mess that up.
yeah, does it have it has an arrow that's supposed to like
Yeah,
show? Okay. Never mind then. I don't
I'm
have a
just
defense
horrible
for
at it.
you.
Like, I just did what felt like, I mean, the game is continuing, but it felt akin to like, what is the final boss in a walking simulator? It was like, you must walk from one corner of the map to the other. And I was like, okay, okay, I can do this, I can do this. And then I took every single wrong turn.
Is
I don't know how I
Firewatch
did it.
is Firewatch a Strand game?
Oh. Anyway, I found this game really hard. I'm like being a little tongue in cheek, but not that much. And also right now, like I'm right near the end and I'm like stuck. I have to look it up. I can't figure out how to get back to the cave. I've
Mhm.
walked around in circles and I'm gonna need to Google it. I just know that if I was there, I could get back to the cave. I'm waiting for VR, baby.
One sort of interesting comment I saw, I read a bunch of Reddit threads on like, do you have difficulty navigating in games or like what are games that make navigating fun or whatever. And there was one comment from Furimbus on Reddit, uh,
Noted expert.
noted expert, that was saying that they're like 6 foot. And they generally feel like the place that they set the camera in FPS games is significantly lower than 6 feet. And so they feel very disoriented walking around in FPSs a lot of the time because their eye level is a lot lower than they're used to it being, which I thought was a really interesting sort of sensation to feel of it that sort of adds to that sense of disorientation.
Maybe all cameras are just set at my perfect almost 5'6" height. Because I don't know that I've ever had the experience of like, oh, the camera feels like it's at a weird height.
I just feel weird in FPS games, period, so I couldn't
Yeah.
tell you if it's because of the height or not. So,
Well, that's interesting too because like you'd think that game developers would be wanting to play into the like male ego urge to be 6 foot plus
sure, yeah.
and setting cameras accordingly, but no, there are things for the girlies and short kings.
Well, I'll tell you this. They don't actually make 6 foot tall represent models of the characters.
Really?
They're in fact smaller than that.
Crazy. Who would have thought?
Nobody would have thought.
Um, it's so funny. That's like what a funny thing to react to the height of the camera. That's never crossed my mind. Um, so there are a lot of different ways that games use to guide us through space, right? And like things that are like very obvious, like mini maps, and things that are less obvious, like environmental cues. Um, Full disclosure, Emma and I both pretty bad at it. Looking at the part of the notes where you're like, The Last of Us, I couldn't find my way. And
See, I didn't actually try to find my way in The Last of Us 2. I have no idea how well it navigates without the navigational assistance on. I saw that that was in options and I turned it on. And then I used it whenever I was a little bit confused about where to go. So I can't actually assess whether it's like easy to navigate. I mean, I went through like the very small like open world section where you're riding around with Dina on the horse and just like explored there and I was fine, right? But whenever it was like I have to figure out where to go, especially if it was like a running sequence and you have to figure out where to go really fast, I would trigger the navigational assistance and just have it tell me. Um, because the navigation is not the point of The Last of Us 2. And so I didn't feel like I was actually taking anything away from myself. I felt like I was actually getting to the parts that they wanted me to get to without my own lack of ability keeping me from getting to those points.
Well, I think there's so many interesting kind of components to that, right? Because for most games, being able to navigate from point A to point B like is a function of the game. Like most games are not like warping you, warping you, warping you. There's some element of pathfinding that's part of it. And it's
Yes.
interesting to consider that for some games that kind of traversal is very much part of the game, capital G, right? And it's a gummy mission. Haha, just kidding. But no, it's Death Stranding is obviously like the biggest all the way on one side example of it where like that's the whole thing.
Yep.
Right? Um but for other games, it's just like, well, you do need to get from point A to point B.
Yes.
So like navigating and traversal has to be part of our game, even though like maybe in a quote unquote perfect world, it might not be.
Yeah.
So that's really tricky because it's just something that you more or less can't get around unless you are making a very specific type. Like if you are making any kind of action adventure-y, vaguely genre-y type game, you have to have some kind of it. And it's like interesting to think about when it is really intentionally part of the experience and when it's just like, well, you gotta walk.
Yeah. I mean,
And
just on like a pacing level, a lot of times the you gotta walk serves as like the down pace in between like action sequences, right? And if you just went action sequence, action sequence, action sequence, eventually you would get very exhausted. And like having that traversal in between is just kind of like a break for the player more than it is about um like the action of moving. And so for a lot of games you want that traversal to be as painless as possible. Because if it's supposed to be a break for the player, and instead the player is banging their head against a wall, perhaps literally trying to figure out where to go, then it's not actually serving the purpose it's supposed to be serving in the game.
do you think that the Skyrim developers knew?
What do you mean? I saw Skyrim as an example of bad maps a lot.
So
So,
it certainly is, but what I'm talking about is navigationally like what's bad about Skyrim's navigation is also what's like good about it in my book,
okay.
which is that like you can just brute force your way up the mountain.
Oh, right. You mean, do
um,
you think they knew that you could glitch your horse up a mountain? Yes,
but
obviously.
do you think that they knew that that would be the joy of the experience? Does that
I,
make sense?
I have no
Like for me, it
idea.
was like there was no greater pleasure than like let me absolutely muscle my way up this mountain instead of going around.
I mean, even when Skyrim came out, Bethesda was already known for its extremely buggy releases.
Yeah,
So, like, yes and no,
yeah,
maybe.
very true.
They knew it was going to be another one of their games. For sure.
But then the other thing that you brought up there when you were talking about The Last of Us 2, that I always feel like I struggle a little bit with how can you do this most effectively in games is it's difficult in a game where you are being asked to play a character or control a character, right? And maybe the game isn't so literally being like you are Ellie or you are Henry or you are whoever, right? But it sort of is. Um, and like that character should know where they're going, right? And I do find it not quite so strongly as to say particularly immersion breaking, but it's something that piques a little alarm in my head for whatever reason when I am having like particular navigational trouble in a situation where my character like absolutely should know where they're going.
Right. Um, I mean, that's why you have, like, signposting, right?
Yeah.
Because you probably aren't having a running monologue in your character's head about what they're thinking
Yeah.
at any particular moment. And so that's why you have stuff like cloths, right? Or yellow paint or
Yellow
little
paint.
shiny effects on certain things so that you know like where you're supposed to be going based on like whatever that character happens to be thinking. I did see, before we get into like signposting like that, I saw a lot of comments on like Reddit threads and stuff about like maybe the characters could just like, give you hints. And it's like, yeah, how'd that work out? That's like the new yellow paint, right? Is like Atreus won't stop telling me where to throw my axe.
Dad, don't you remember?
Yeah, yeah.
Dad. There's no winning. There's no winning with gamers.
Yes.
So signposting, yeah, obviously is so many different ways that you can try to help gamers know where to go. We're yellow paint aficionados here at Talk This, I would say.
Sure.
I appreciate some yellow paint. I don't know.
I think it was I'm sure there's been others since then, but I remember when Rebirth released its demo, people were getting very upset about the yellow paint that's in Nibelheim. And fun fact, when you get to the rest of the game, there is no other yellow paint like anywhere.
I think a couple of the little
Yuffie draws some yellow chalk drawings for you. There are big chocobo signs where your chocobo can climb things in the Junon region, but that's technically not yellow paint. Just, it's funny that caused such an uproar, and that is in fact the only area that they use the yellow paint.
They should have known better.
Well, it's like, that's kind of what you use paint for marking trails, right? Not necessarily yellow paint, but I feel like that is a popular color.
Yeah.
And like, I feel like that's kind of where it comes from. And also it's a color that stands out when it's dark, too. RE4 Remake was another one that was like, oh my god, there's yellow paint everywhere. But like, yeah. You want to figure out where to go as Leon Kennedy? That's not why you're here.
Yeah.
You want to try kicking boxes that you can't kick all the time? No. Right?
No, I mean, that's the whole tension. I mean, that's this whole same tension that's going to be the question this whole episode and navigation in general is that, like, okay, like, there's immersion on one hand where the world looks just like the world, and there's immersion on the other hand where the player spends a bunch of time banging their head against stuff in ways that their character should not be doing.
Yeah.
And, like, from my perspective, I would always rather have better, like, character experience immersion than, like, why does this box sparkle a little bit immersion.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, especially for stuff like interactables, there's a lot of discussion of like, well, in old games, like your interactable objects would always stand out from like the pre-rendered backgrounds because they were on different planes. And so in like more realistic games, you can't really emulate that because all the boxes are boxes that belong. So you have to literally mark the interactable boxes differently in some way, or else the player is going to be consistently trying to break things that they can't break. And I think that's interesting in like this pursuit of realism. It makes things more difficult, and in fact you have to maybe include realism breaking elements to allow for the gameplay flow to actually work as intended. Yeah. My general feeling on yellow paint is it's not actually a terribly interesting conversation.
Yeah.
And I feel like its use and whether it's used well is up to the type of game that it is and what those game goals are. And like people put too much emphasis on like immersion in games.
Word up, homie.
Like the whole point of games is they have these sort of meta level elements, and that's what makes them sort of interesting. And just trying to be immersed because the world looks so realistic is just not terribly interesting to me.
But Emma, we want to escape from our lives.
That's what the yellow paint is. Yellow paint is escapism to me. Can you imagine? You head outside and you've got the Stanley Parable Adventure line for you. Come
It's
on, that's
sick.
escapism.
Yeah.
It tells you exactly what you need to do to make the world a better place. That's what I'd like.
Bring it on. Well, we can't have that, but maybe we could have. I'm sort of looking at my own example of my version of this outside my window right now. We can't have yellow paint in the real world, but we probably can have weenies.
Yeah.
I couldn't believe this was a real word. I saw it in that little like here's some terminology medium piece, which also featured the term birth canal for like a bottleneck that your character is forced through, and I was like, I will not use
I
that.
think we should change that one.
That one doesn't feel good. But weenies, a weenie, a cocktail weenie. No, just kidding. Um, it's originally a Disney. It's from the Imagineers at Disney.
Sure.
So like the Cinderella Castle or whatever,
Mhm.
like big tall landmarks in the park that you use to figure out where you are, or that are like central attractions.
Mhm.
And apparently, game designers have adapted it as their own.
Well, I mean, what is designing a game level if it's not just designing a little mini theme park,
It pretty
honestly?
much is.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm looking at the big tall Brooklyn Tower that pretty much is my real life weenie
Yeah,
right
exactly.
now. Like there he is. But obviously, if you're, the easy ways, quote unquote, to help players get around are there's like an obvious path you have to follow, or there's like bright lines pointing you in the direction, or there's a mini map. And perhaps the subtler, more in vogue way of doing this in open world type of things now is let's have Assassin's Creed towers everywhere.
Right, yes. Exactly. Um, I don't think that's quite what a weenie is supposed to be. Those
I
are
know.
just
That
Assassin's
was
Creed towers.
like 40% a joke. But I read a good article on Game Developer, sort of specifically diving into the Sucker Punch's approach to this with Ghost of Tsushima. So they, made the pretentious decision to not have like, they're not like other girls,
Mhm.
right? So they're not going to have like UI marker minimap nonsense that is the main way of moving around, which, yeah, minimap's not trendy right now, certainly.
I
Um,
understand.
but you still have to be able to signpost to the player, hey, like you should want to go here, or there might be something interesting here, or where am I?
Yeah.
Like, where am I in space? And so they divided it for themselves into weenies that were flags and weenies that were breadcrumbs.
Right.
Flags are very much the Assassin's Creed towers. That's not just that, but it's like, oh, I see smoke in the distance, or there's a big tree, or there's a big building, right? The thing that you
Yes.
see and go, ooh, let me run towards that. And if you're Madeline playing Breath of the Wild, you go, ooh, let me run towards that. Ooh, let me run towards that. Ooh,
Exactly.
let me run towards that. Too weenie.
And then
Um,
breadcrumbs.
and then breadcrumbs are more like in Ghost of Tsushima. It's like they're Torii gates, right? They're little guys. They're a little clue when you see them. That's like, hey, maybe there's something here, and you should go into it.
Right. Yeah, I feel like I mean that's just good level design, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um when you're designing your world, you want it to have interesting things to do and you want the player to be able to find those interesting things by navigating around, right? Um but I also feel like, you know, I feel like my big takeaway from this research is just like options are good.
It's true. I mean,
Having toggles are nice.
much like difficulty settings, much like any controversial, semi-controversial gameplay element, um, especially in a game where the exploring or the traversing is not the central element of your game. Some players are going to be really in it for that and love that, and some players are really going to want to get from thing to thing to thing. And it does seem like the best way to do that is to just let them press R3 and turn the minimap on and off, or
Yes.
turn the indicators
And
on and
sometimes a
off.
single player might want, like, okay, this is my explore the world time, and then maybe they're like, okay, I'd like to focus on progressing through the story now. And maybe having all the markers off and just following signposting is really fun for the exploring the world part, but when they're really feeling like they want to pursue the mission and instead keep accidentally entering little side quest areas or whatever, maybe that then becomes frustrating instead, right? So I feel like, that's why options are good. Also, just, I feel like mini maps were actually the most immersive form of um like navigation design because I have one of those, right? It's called Google Maps.
Emma just brandished her phone.
It's called Google Maps. And when I'm somewhere I don't know, I put my waypoint, where I want to go. And then I look at my phone and follow the streets just like I do in a video game.
In many ways, games were ahead of the curve.
Exactly.
No, it is funny to think of us all carrying around our little mini maps now.
I guess, back in the day they had like little like maps, right?
Right.
Or little like
That's true.
fold out maps or whatever.
The kind of maps that real gamers want.
Yes, exactly.
Probably one day when we're all wearing Google Glass or whatever, our cybernetic implants, we will just have the mini map.
Yeah.
Embedded. And hopefully we'll have a function to turn it off.
Hopefully.
Do you have, this is a tangent before I get back to the main point, where do you want your mini map on the screen? I thought that was a really funny thread to stumble into. People were like, is it best top left, top right, bottom left, or bottom right?
So if for like a game where your character has like health or whatever, right? That has to be in one of the bottom corners for me.
Yeah.
But for a mini map, honestly doesn't matter. It just depends on where the other UI elements are, basically.
Why do you think you care about the health but not the mini map?
Because I feel like in a lot of games your character, the model is closer to the bottom of the screen than the top of the screen. So I'm able to sort of see my health while I'm fighting things. Whereas I can look at the mini map whenever I want if I'm just navigating, right? Objective markers, like the lists of objectives, like what you're supposed to do next, also has to be at the top of the screen, so I don't see them all the time and can just look at them when I want.
Developers take note.
These are the UI things I actually feel strongly about, and just depending on which elements you have, you can put the mini map where it's free,
These are pillars of game design. These are truisms.
Also, just like deeply prefer a mini map to a compass, honestly.
Yeah. I've come around to the compass a little bit in Firewatch because it doesn't lie to me.
That's fair enough. But yeah, for me just the compass, like, it's frustrating because I will just follow like whatever marker is up on my compass, right? In the most direct possible path I can take to it. And so when I run into a mountain that I then have to go around, that's very frustrating versus when I can see it on my minimap and be like, "Oh, there's a mountain between me and the objective that I'm going to, so I might have to go around."
Mm-hmm.
Just sets the expectations better.
I do feel like minimaps in general do not do a great job with topography.
Yes. I mean,
It's hard.
yeah, the do maps do a good job with topography, probably if you know how to read them.
I just feel like I've struggled with this a little bit recently in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. I had to fast travel. I had been running around like just randomly in the Cosmo Canyon region.
Cosmo Canyon was my least favorite place to navigate, so yeah.
I enjoyed the jump. Like for a little bit I was kind of enjoying, particularly because this came for me right after my forced march through the game. Just kidding. I enjoyed doing it this way actually. I'm starting to think that maybe I need to get back to doing it this way because I'm losing momentum. But I enjoyed having the like, ooh, let me run around, let me see where I can jump around to kind of fun for a while. But then I could not for the life of me figure out how to get back up to the like little village on the way.
Mhm.
So eventually I'd just be like, because I knew I had seen the signs when I was up there, signs that I remembered leading me to where I was supposed to go next. And I kept being like, surely this way will lead me back up there.
Yeah.
And it didn't. I was also confused for a while because I felt like I had run to the place where the sort of story marker was. And I was like, why is nothing happening? I'm running through here. Of course, it's because it was 100 feet above me.
Yes. As it can be. Yeah. Luckily, you never have to feel like your immersion is broken when you're lost in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. Fun fact from Remake. You know when you jump off the train when you're going to bomb the second reactor?
Uh-huh.
You can, in fact, go the exact wrong way. And it will let you run along the train tracks for like 5 to 10 minutes. And periodically, Tifa and Barrett will be like, Cloud, are we sure? And Cloud will be like, yes, I know I'm going the right way. Until you hit a dead end. And then have to run all the way back.
That's unbelievable.
When you meet Aerith later, she mentions that Cloud seems like someone who would go the wrong way and stubbornly insist it was the right way the whole time. And he sure is.
Look, this game is a game about being lost.
It is, you're right.
These people do not know where they're going.
It's so true. Yeah, exactly. But when you're lost in Rebirth, you just are feeling closer to Cloud.
That's right. You are actually more immersed than you were before. That's so funny. I like that. More games should have those kinds of like funny navigation things, I think. Games are, I mean, look, it frustrates me, and this is like a little bit tangential, right? But, you know, obviously the like, you can climb this rock, but not that one of it all
Right.
is challenging. But yeah, games don't want to let you go the wrong way, mostly, which makes sense. I mean, you and your trawling of Reddit, came with the takeaway of like, people don't like being lost, which
I
is
don't
true.
like being lost.
Yeah.
Like in real life.
That's right.
Like, when you're lost in real life, it ranges between slightly frustrating to actively scary, right?
Yeah.
Like, I can't think of a time when I was, like, lost and, like, having fun. You know? Like, actually lost.
Yeah.
Like, there's one thing between, like, sort of randomly wandering, like, a big museum or something.
Right. Or like, haha, where am I in this department store?
Yeah.
Or whatever.
Yeah. Versus, like, you're in a
Where
place you
am
don't
I?
know, and you don't know where you are.
Yes. I've missed the exit driving back from the show, and now we're in Georgetown.
Yes. Exactly. Yes. The exit I missed many times and then had to turn around in Georgetown and go all the way back. Because for some reason there was no exit between those two places.
I'm glad you knew what I was talking about.
Yes.
Shout out GW Parkway. So shall we talk mini maps? I feel like it's time for a little mini map. We're sagging into it.
Sure.
Just want to say, Sakurai, if you find mini maps kind of distracting, so does Sakurai. I really liked his comment at the beginning of his video about mini maps that's like, when I have a mini map, I am mostly, that is the world for me.
I mean, that's fair, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. That is one issue with it, for sure.
Yeah, you spend so much time looking at that and not actually at the beautiful game world surroundings. You're just like, let me see, little rectangle.
Yes, yeah.
But, you know, minimaps get a lot of hate online. And most of that hate really, as we've talked about a little bit, just seems to be at people being like, let me toggle it on and off.
Yeah.
Because almost all of these articles are like, I love the idea of pulling up a map. And it's like, buddy, that's what a mini map is. How about you just tape a piece of paper over that part of the screen and get up and move the piece of paper when you want to look at the map?
I do feel like there is sort of like this distinction in like types of maps, and that some games will give you like oh, your character must pull out their map when you wish to look at it. And other ones are like, the map pops up on the screen when he wishes to look at it, which I think is like a funny, because it's ultimately the same thing, right? It's just like, can you also see your character's hand while
I
it's
actually
happening?
find it kind of hard, at least on the Switch, to move my vision around the map in Firewatch.
Hmm.
Sometimes it works perfectly, and sometimes it's very like he's shaking his hands around for
Is it
no
your
like.
is it your stick drift?
That might be it.
Yeah.
I hadn't thought about the stick drift of it all. I was just like, man, Henry's like got some weird, like drifty, shaky hands.
He's
God,
old
I didn't think
too,
of
you
that.
know.
Wow, that might be it. Huh? Okay. Um, but I found this really interesting, and they have kind of a whole series on this from this cartography company, Stamen. They have a whole series of real life cartographers, which like really funny to remember that there are like still cartographers in the world.
What do you mean?
Just
There's
feels like
mapping.
the world is mapped, you know?
Things change all the time, Mal.
I know. I'm not saying there shouldn't be. To
It's
just
just,
be
yes,
very
sure.
clear,
Yes, fair enough.
no hatred to cartographers
We think
here.
cartographers should be extinct here. Chalk this,
I'd like
honestly.
to see them wiped off the map.
And you know, in fact, cartographers needed for video games, so
Yes.
they actually do have to continue to exist.
I just wonder what percentage of cartography work now is done on romantasy novels.
That too, yeah.
Like in the world, do you think?
Yeah.
Surely at least 2%.
Somebody's specialty is that, and honestly, I think that's the life that I should have had.
Right? The path not taken.
Yeah.
I could have been drawing maps for Dragon Smut.
Exactly.
Could have been me. Could not have been me. We did that like map project in 10th grade and it was horrible. So could not have been me, but maybe, who knows. So anyway, I read they did one on Tears of the Kingdom. They also did one I read on Elden Ring where they were like less impressed.
Oh,
Right?
really? People
But I
love
thought it was
Elden Ring.
interesting. You know, one of them presented his like 4 I words as pillars of cartography in play settings or in game settings, right? And those 4 things being that the map is interactive, or like the ways in which it's interactive, that it's immersive, that it's incomplete, and in like multiplayer settings, right, that it's interpersonal. And I thought that was a really kind of interesting way of categorizing the ways we do or don't interact with mini maps and the ways that they sometimes are or aren't like frustrating, right?
Yeah.
Because I think the interactive portion is often kind of like overlooked in how we think about this.
Yeah. Um, I mean, for one game I saw brought up a lot of like what's games that's fun to navigate in. It was Sea of Thieves, like all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And just on the interpersonal one, I was thinking about like it is probably more fun to navigate like with your buddies,
Yeah.
you know, in a low stress situation where you're not on the highway.
Many hands make light work, or many eyes make light work, I guess. Yeah, not in the highway. Thank you.
um, but like having someone direct you verbally and like getting lost, you know, and trying to figure out the map together, that's sort of like a fun social experience that you can't really emulate in a single player game in the
Yeah,
same
it's
way.
the road trip mentality.
And for
Where you
the
can emulate it, but it just is Atreus being like, Dad, you
dad, we're
missed your
going the
exit.
wrong way.
Yeah.
Dad, why did the directions write down the number of the road instead of the name of it? Boy, I do not know.
Boy, I pull up Google Maps.
Uh, and the incomplete one on is also like a clear distinction in some the way some mini maps do it, where either like it's filled in as you go or it's already filled in, right?
Yeah.
Or some combination of that. Like in some Metroidvanias, you get like map information that is filled in after you complete an area, for example.
Yeah. Well, overall, they really loved the Tears of the Kingdom. Well, Tears of the Kingdom has like 3 maps, like tiered. They made a good Tears of the Kingdom joke, which I chuckled at. I liked it. That could have been like a joke at the beginning of the show. But they really liked how those maps kind of like talked to each other, right? Like you'd like sort of see pins from one and the other, and it really gave you a sense of where you were in space across those 3 levels, which is like
Hmm.
super important in a game where moving between the 3 is like a key element of the exploration.
Hmm.
And they also like that you can put stickers on a map. You should pretty much always be able to put markers on a map.
Yeah. Yes, I agree with that, that you should be able to put a marker down for yourself.
And probably as many as you want.
Yeah. I mean, I say always, like, whatever. You want to put a maze in your game, then probably you shouldn't be able to put a marker down, I guess. But you
Sure.
should be able to, like, trail little breadcrumbs behind you or something, you know? And that probably wouldn't work well in a maze, actually. You get very
It'd
confused.
lead the monster straight to
Yeah.
you.
But when you're just, like, wandering around the world generally, you should have a waypoint setting ability, for sure.
Absolutely. Because your character is a better navigator
Yeah.
than you are. They just are doing that in their head.
Right, yeah. Um, so just from an accessibility standpoint, I watched an accessibility video, which has a sort of series and people who do a lot of like reflections on accessibility in games. And this one was on aphantasia, which is essentially
Aphantasia.
aphantasia. A? Is it really
Yeah.
pronounced like that?
Yep.
Wow. I even watched the video. I guess I just didn't process that.
Well, I don't know. This is how this will come. This is how Clickbait Boyfriend pronounces it.
Okay. Um, but it's like essentially that you do not have a visual imagination in the same way that other people do. Like if you say, picture an apple in your head, you can't visualize an apple.
Yeah.
Like I can think of an apple and I see it. I even like when I'm thinking in words, I see those words in my head.
Yeah. Sometimes.
So
For me. Yeah.
even so this was it's a very interesting thing, a very hard thing for me to wrap my head around because when I'm trying to imagine it, I'm visualizing it, which means I can't really imagine it actually, right? Which is just like an interesting disconnect here. Um but the video was talking a little bit about like there's a bunch of things that this makes hard in games, like in mystery solving games, like being asked to recall the scene of the crime or recall like a character, like which character looks like this or this. That can be quite hard if it's not actually showing it to you in any sort of meaningful way. But in terms of navigation, it can be hard to create your own like that you can't really create your own visual representation of the world inside your head, right?
Yeah.
Um, and I think the main example that was used was Carrion, which is like a 2D sort of Metroidvania game. And I think in those it's especially hard, right? I can see how it'd be especially hard because like those feel like they're almost entirely sort of visual based, right? Of having like these screens and then imagining how these screens fit
Yeah. Link
together
together.
with each other in a way that like you can't see what's coming next as you enter the next screen, right?
Yeah.
And so if you don't have an overarching map, I can see how if you can't like visualize the last screen you were on when you enter a new one, that would get extremely frustrating very fast.
Yeah. Well, hilariously, I mean, you put this into the notes entirely independently of this, but Clickbait Boyfriend, who studies the imagination and how the imagination gives us justification to believe or not believe things,
You have to
uh,
say that in a clickbaity way to keep it on brand.
it's like when the friends are carrying the couch up the stairs.
That's your clickbait?
Yeah, how do they know that it can fit?
Okay, so it's like a picture. Sorry, we're doing a picture, like for the thumbnail. and we've got Ross, and he's holding the couch,
Yeah.
and his head is circled, and it's pointed to, and it says, "How does he know?"
Exactly. Yeah.
There you go.
That's the cover of his dissertation.
Yeah.
Um, anyway, so naturally, of course, he is very interested in aphantasia because it like gives him a lot of like interesting material to work with. He like literally just finished a draft of a paper that is like about aphantasia. So it was really, when I saw this in the doc, I like freaked out. So I was like, that's crazy. But like Click Good Boyfriend's whole thing is that actually in like tasks where you ask aphantasiacs to like rotate an image or like rotate an object in their mind or something and predict whatever, there's all sorts of examples of this, right? But like, what does it look like, or what is the number on the die, or like imagine a task, right? You know, they don't report imagining anything, right? They can't, like, they're like, I feel like I'm guessing, right? But when you see how accurate are they at being able to do those kinds of tasks, it's actually been shown in like multiple studies that they are like not really less accurate. Like they are more accurate than they should be, given that they report that they are just guessing,
Right.
right? Which indicates that like, at least in Click With Boyfriend's opinion, that like, oh, like maybe they like have a visual imagination that's happening like in their brain in a way that they can't consciously access it. Anyway, I won't get into this too much, but I asked him about this when you had put this in the doc, and he was saying that like it's possible that we have kind of two different kinds of imagery, right? Like sensory imagery and spatial imagery, and aphantasia might just be about like your sensory imagery not being something that you have a deficit in. So like they aren't able to form an image of the map, but like underneath in a way that they would not consciously understand, they still have that capacity.
Mm-hmm.
But he also did say it's not clear that spatial navigation always relies on mental imagery, like that there might be other cognitive systems that are at play for representing space. And you're totally right to say that like maybe virtually this becomes even harder than in like real life situations.
Yeah.
But it was interesting. It was certainly not something I'd ever thought of in the context of games.
Yeah. Yeah, I just feel like it's a little more different virtually because you can't look at multiple things at the same time as easily, I feel
Mm-hmm.
like. Again, with no expertise. But like if you have a map in a game that you have to pull out and like your whole camera focuses on that map while you're looking at it, right?
Yeah.
And then you have to look back up again and the map goes away.
Yeah.
That's not quite how you would use a map, I think,
Again,
with your
neck
real
brace.
life.
Yeah.
And so I can see how like one taking up the whole screen and then vanishing for the other thing, if you can't like visualize it, it might be hard to then connect those things. It's hard for me to connect those things sometimes.
Yep.
So I can see how it would be hard for someone who can't like hold the picture of the map in their head as much as I can, you know.
It was interesting to read too in the sort of sciencey space about some studies about like navigation in games and how it does or doesn't relate to your ability to navigate in real life. There was a pretty good Vice article about this, like what video games teach us about the psychology of navigation, right? Which noted also, right, interestingly, like navigation in general is something that has become much, much more central to games as they get bigger and more realistic and whatever. Like you would never think of navigating, I don't know, Pac-Man, really, right? Like it's there, it's right there in front of you. Um, but they talked a lot with Dr. Amy Shelton from Johns Hopkins University, right? And like analyzing this study that was done where adults were put into a modded Duke Nukem maze, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they had to find certain objects after watching a video tour. And they saw that like some subjects activated certain parts of their brain, were able to find like shortcuts, right, and save time. And subjects who saw like higher readings in another part of their brain tended to just like follow the instructions. And the doctor was very much like, there's not really necessarily one that's quote unquote better than the other, but there are like different ways your brain works to do
Mm-hmm.
this.
I did read the Science Direct thing that you posted with the from the Journal of Environmental Psychology on video games being associated with spatial navigation performance.
Yeah.
I did think it was interesting that like one of the limitations that they listed was like, well, our test was a video game,
Yeah.
so it's possible that the people who play video games are in fact just better at video games.
That's
But
always the
still,
trick.
still interesting. Still an
Yeah.
interesting thing of like seeing that having more experience with video games perhaps makes you better at navigating, which maybe again just has to do with like, well, you if you play video games, you probably do more navigating than the average person does, even if it's slightly different navigating.
Certainly more navigating unfamiliar spaces.
Yes. Like just versus like even like you're a big film buff, right? And you watch movies instead of playing video games, you're doing navigation in the games. You probably aren't doing very much navigation watching the movies, right?
Yeah.
So I guess just in terms of like those are the skills that you're activating when you're playing games in some manner or form. Anyway, I'm waiting for those skills to hit me.
Seriously.
I play a lot of games, and I'd like to have an intrinsic knowledge at all times of where I am.
You're a good navigator, though.
No, I'm not.
You're a good journey planner.
Okay, sure, yeah.
So maybe the problem is that you are compensating so heavily for the fact that you are not a natural, like, let me figure out where I am person and navigate, that you're not giving yourself the ability to develop those skills.
Maybe.
We gotta just drop you in the wilderness and see if you can find your way back.
When I was going up to NYC HQ, I did in fact briefly get on the train line running in the wrong direction because I got confused by the signage. But fortunately, as I got to the next stop, the train going the other way was arriving. So in fact, I lost no time.
Oh, on the metro.
Yeah.
I thought you were referring to Amtrak.
No, I'm sorry, I meant the
I was like,
metro.
how did you do that? That's bad.
No, I in the metro.
Okay. I was like, I was in Richmond. And all of a sudden. Well, I don't think I'm ever gonna be good at it. In games in particular, I'm a mini map addict and I'm gonna stay that way.
Yeah. I think we've talked before about like transportation in games.
Mm-hmm.
And I hold to the fact that I would just like, like Ignis Final Fantasy 15 or whatever equivalent in your video game could just drive me places when I want to go.
A valet.
Yeah, and the little guys in the car will do cute little animations, and I can sort of sit there and meditate for like 5 minutes.
I think that's a solid idea.
And I think that that's the way that games should be, actually. So I don't have to think at all. I can just enjoy the little guys.
Well, listeners, would you like little guys to drive you around everywhere in real life or in games? How would you rate your game's navigation, map reading, whatever skills on a scale of 1 to 10? Do you have favorite examples of video game maps or of ways that weenies in games? If you have thoughts about this or anything else we talked about this week, hit us up on social media. We're on Facebook, Blue Sky, Instagram, and YouTube at Talk This Podcast. At Talk This Podcast. There's no .com there. But you could visit talkthispodcast.com, our website, to learn more about the show, check out the games in the hat, and read our blog featuring the long-running series, Click Like Boyfriend and Split Screen, featuring a bunch of blogs from Emma, all sorts of fun stuff. Jump in. But most importantly, if you enjoy the show, why, you ought to subscribe. We're on Apple Podcasts, YouTube Podcasts, TuneIn, Spotify, Pandora Podcasts, online and on the app, Overcast, Pocket Casts, wherever you can find podcasts. Subscribe to Talk This.
Like my boyfriend can let me know if he wants me to make that cool thumbnail for his next paper.
I'll see. We'll find out when he listens to this. I'll make a note to myself to ask him about it.
Okay.
So, we'll see if he mentions it on his own. Hopefully this part of it will prompt him.
Yeah. Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
On his own. Pretty good thumbnail idea, I gotta say.
It is. It's good.
What are we talking about next week? I don't remember.
For our old game, we're talking about Mario Party.
Right. I knew it was something very familiar.
And for our new game, we're talking about Eiyuden Chronicles 100 Heroes.
So look forward to that. And in 2 weeks, it's Emma's side quest.
I will
Post
find
Valentine's
my
Day.
way to a topic, you might
Yeah.
say.
Good one.
Thanks.
Well, listeners, that's this week's show. Emma, give us a navigational closer.
This week, I hope that you can find exactly where you're going.